Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us at Climate Week NYC today. I'm Helen Clarkson, CEO of the Climate Group, and I'll be your moderator. As many of our viewers will know, the Climate Group is an international non-profit with offices in London, New Delhi and New York. And our mission is to drive climate action fast. Our goal is a world of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 with greater prosperity for all. And we do this by forming powerful networks of business and government, unlocking the power of collective action and shifting global markets and policies towards faster reductions in carbon emissions. So the discussion today is what leadership looks like in the climate decade. Yesterday we talked about a green recovery from the COVID pandemic. Today we're exploring what needs to happen after that, so longer term commitments and plans. Last week we released a survey we commissioned of American people. Over a third say they now trust the government less in their ability to tackle the climate crisis compared to before the pandemic. However, almost double the number of respondents say they trust their state government to tackle the climate crisis compared to the federal government. This is particularly the case in California and here in New York, both states that have set net zero targets and are rolling out pro-climate policies. In these states, triple the number of residents say they trust their state government more than the national government to take climate action. Now, obviously, this cannot be extrapolated to countries with less controversial federal leadership. But I can say with confidence that in many countries around the world, state and regional governments have stepped up in response to the pandemic. You've seen it on the news, and we've seen it within the Under 2 coalition, of which the Climate Group is the secretariat. We need to see that level of leadership from them, from you, when it comes to the climate. And I believe we will. The same is true with businesses. Along with our We Mean Business coalition partners, we've seen over 1,000 businesses commit to some form of climate action, and many of them commit to multiple campaigns. Through our campaigns, we've shown that making commitments such as transitioning to electric vehicles and doubling energy productivity make financial sense, but there's also a growing sense that customers and staff will not settle for less. Leadership is also growing in areas such as the built environment and industry, which are proving harder but not impossible to adapt. There's huge potential for emissions reductions in areas such as steel, cement, aluminium and other hard to abate sectors, but our work in these areas is just beginning. As consumers and citizens, we are demanding more. And today the speakers in this event are going to explore what more looks like. We'll have our first panel, Picking Up the Pace, Increasing Investment in Green Infrastructure. And then we have a fantastic segment with Alok Sharma, COP26 President and Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy here in the UK, and Christiana Figueres, co-founder of Global Optimism. We've called this segment From Paris to Glasgow, and our speakers are going to be having a conversation about how COP26 needs to be as agenda setting for this decade as COP21 was for the last. And then we have another panel, this one entitled The Long Journey to Net Zero, Setting Up the Next Generation for Success. Please do feel free to tweet along to the event and make sure to follow up with your fellow attendees in our chat box too. Welcome everyone to panel 1 of Conquering the Climate Decade. I'm joined today by Dr. Richard Mattison, CEO of Trucost, which is part of S&P Global, Minister Catherine McKenna, Minister of Infrastructure and Communities for Canada, Dr. Pedro Pizarro, President and CEO of Edison International, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, CEO and Chairperson of the Global Environmental Facility, and Dr. Rhian Marie Thomas, CEO of the Green Finance Institute. Thank you all for joining me for this panel. So let's start with you, Richard. Over the past few years, we've seen a huge acceleration in corporate reporting on environmental, social and governance data. What information do investors need from businesses and governments to make the kind of investments we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, investors obviously need information that is relevant in a financial context. So efforts such as the TCFD are incredibly important in that context. And it's worth noting, actually, that only yesterday, the New Zealand government made that mandatory. So I think financial relevance is key, but also timely, up-to-date information on ESG information and information that's as accurate as possible. So at S&P Global, we really have to get that kind of information because we integrate that information into our indices, such as the S&P 500, also into our credit ratings and other aspects that we work on. So we analyze 15,000 companies for that type of information, and we see a huge increase in demand for ESG and climate type information.
Thank you. And now a question for Minister McKenna. So Canada has recently committed billions to green infrastructure as part of the green recovery from coronavirus. But alongside the opportunities in green growth, there's also a number of transition risks. How are you going to manage those over the course of the next decade?
Well, thanks, Helen. I'm thrilled to be here. It's obviously a very different way to be celebrating Climate Week. Look, I want to start from first principles. I think right now, obviously, people are really worried about COVID. That's a huge issue here in Canada. And it's a health crisis and it's an economic crisis. And I think that's exactly the same way we need to look at climate change. Climate change is, one day we will get out of COVID, but we're not getting out of the climate crisis anytime soon. And we're not going to get out of it without concerted action, including investing the billions that we need to do to transition to a cleaner future. Just look at British Columbia. Right now, it has the worst air quality in the world. That's as a result of the fires coming up from the US. And so we need to be working. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. My previous job was Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I kind of laugh because now as Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, I have money. So that's good. But I think that, we need to think about risks. And risks is, like Richard said, risk is to the bottom line of businesses. If you're not getting with the program and recognizing that it's a huge risk to your economy if you don't transition, and a huge economic opportunity in the trillions, it's been estimated at $30 trillion, then you're going to miss out. But I have to think about real people in my job. And in Canada, we have a very diverse economy. Natural resources play a very significant role. And if you're going to be able to take serious action and bring people along, which you have to do if you're a politician, you need to be making sure that everyone is part of that. So in Canada, that means that our most marginalized, like our Inuit who live in the Arctic, who have caused the least to cause climate change, need to be part of it. But also that also means that oil and gas workers need to be part of this transition. And so that's something that we think very hard about. How do you make investments that are going to make sure that you transition all parts of the economy and that you really bring people together? And I think, look, there's a great business case. If you look at infrastructure, McKinsey's estimated $1 invested, $1 million invested in infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, creates 7 jobs. But $1 million invested in green infrastructure creates between 9 and 13 jobs. So there's a clear case, but I always have to be grounded in the reality of people, making sure that when you put a price on pollution, people are recognizing this is good for them. In Canada, we give more money back. And you really have to make sure that also you're recognizing right now people are really worried about the pandemic. And so we need to be, not only one-trick ponies talking about climate, but we need to be talking about how we're going to get out of the pandemic, because that is the best way for us to be able to focus on rebuilding back better.
Thank you. And a question now for you, Pedro. How are you working to build and indeed fund the building of resilient infrastructure in increasingly difficult weather conditions?
Well, thank you. And we are certainly seeing the need for that. You already heard a mention of the wildfires here in California, the world's 5th largest economy. We've seen drought, we've seen drier dries, wetter wets, and now we're seeing these unprecedented wildfires. So we are working hard to basically understand what we need to do to prepare for this. How will we harden the grid, for example, the electric grid, to enable it to withstand a much different set of weather conditions and the hazard of wildfires? How do we work with our local communities? For example, our coastal communities are going to see the impacts of sea level rise over the decades ahead. So significant work on hardening the grid and helping infrastructure hardening across society. But in addition to that, we also need to work on the root cause here, which is climate change. And so we're also investing significantly in thinking ahead to how we change the source of energy for society. And as we've looked at the California microcosm, which we think is a good example for the rest of the globe, we've seen that in order for California to meet its objective of decarbonizing the entire economy by 2045, we need to take on a massive task to repower the economy, literally repower the economy using clean energy from renewables coupled with storage to electrify a lot of the rest of the economy. So we think it's a lift that will require 3/4 of passenger vehicles to be electric by 2045, and 70% of buildings to use electricity for space and water heating. We'll need clean fuels for areas that are hard to electrocute, some carbon capture through direct forest, for direct air capture. Lots of tools here that are needed, but the point is that we need to be doing our part not only to harden the infrastructure to withstand the impacts of climate, but the infrastructure to address the root cause of climate. And that's something we must do globally, but we're getting started on that in California.
Thank you. And Carlos, the business case for investment into low carbon technology is becoming stronger and stronger. But what about nature-based solutions to climate change? How can we ensure that we're putting in place mechanisms that value and protect forests, oceans, and ecosystems?
Well, thank you. Good morning, Helen, and hi to all. Let me give you just some very broad numbers on where we are in terms of climate finance. According to the global landscape of climate finance, we should be investing around $0.6 trillion annually to be on track for the 1.6. Actually, we are investing from all sources: private sector, international ODA, and public domestic expenditures around $546 billion. That is just 40% of what we should be mobilizing as of today. And the other element which is important in this context is that 80% of what we are annually investing in climate change is done in industrialized countries in their own very own transition from the transportation and energy sector. So the flow of resources from industrialized countries to developed middle income nation is not that much. And here is where then we need to generate, and probably 90% of what we annually invest in climate change investment is concentrated on climate mitigation, not that much on climate adaptation, which is another very important issue. So we need to generate a couple of things here. One is a balance within the flow of resources, and that cannot happen just by increasing ODA. This means letting countries understand that it's in their very own self-interest to mobilize domestic resources, as we move also here the capital markets and the banks that they should move speedily towards green finance. Nature-based solutions is 30% of the climate solution. It gives us multiple benefits and co-benefits. Co-benefits in terms of human well-being, biodiversity conservation, but give us direct benefits in terms of our climate aspiration, in climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Even though it is 30% of the climate solution, it only receives 2% of the international flows for climate finance. And this is key and an important element. Last year, during the Climate Summit, nature-based solution throughout the pre-COP 25 in Costa Rica and the COP 25 in Spain, nature-based solutions really received the attention of the planet. And I think that, we made a great effort behind it. And of course, the government of Canada and Minister McKenna was key to position nature-based solution as a cost-effective manner. Now, we need to be able to really understand that the benefits of nature-based solutions goes beyond our climate agenda, and they give us all kind of benefits in terms of our sustainability aspiration, but as well our human development aspiration. So you may say $1.6 trillion is very expensive, and I would say, compared to what? What are the other options? That's a key decision. And I would like to finalize by sharing a little bit about my country's experience. Costa Rica has gone in the last 30 years, zero net emission from the electric sector, zero net emission from land use change, deforestation, which is the second source of emissions to the planet. And we did it while we tripled the economy, doubled the size of our population, and 90% of those resources were invested through public expenditure. It was Costa Rica finding innovative mechanisms to finance their decarbonation agenda. So as Costa Rica, as many other middle income and developing countries doing very innovative, very interesting things.
Thank you. And Rhian Marie, we've heard there starting to talk about the trillions of dollars that we need to mobilise into solving climate change over the decade. Green finance is starting to break through into the mainstream, but we're just nowhere near the levels required. How do you convince the sceptics and those operating with short-term investment horizons to allocate capital in the right direction?
Well, thanks ever so much, Helen. And before I make remarks, just as we speak, our thoughts obviously with those families and communities that have been impacted by the wildfires. But to answer your question about, how do we break through that this really is the investment opportunity of the century? We go back to the work that, 5 years ago, it was the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate set out that we needed 90 trillion, their estimate, to invest in infrastructure in order to meet climate goals. And that number came with a major caveat that, despite the eminence of the commissioners, when they put that figure forward, they also emphasized the shortcomings of current economic models to capture the full dynamics at play. And as we transition an entire global economy to net zero carbon. And importantly, those economic models also grossly underestimate the benefits of this new growth story. And we've heard a couple of the other speakers touch on this already. The Commission's New Climate Economy report published last year, 2018, actually found that bold action could yield a direct economic gain of $26 trillion through to 2030, compared with business as usual. So that's estimates of 65 million new low carbon jobs by 2030. That's equivalent to the combined workforces of the UK and Egypt today. And that's likely to be a conservative estimate. But one thing I would say as a banker is these large numbers that, they really capture the imagination and hopefully they galvanize some interest, but they aren't the mechanisms by which finance will actually be deployed to those real economy outcomes. And that is where we need to be collaborating across both public and private sectors, and importantly, including civil society in those discussions too, to figure out what are the innovative mechanisms that will actually deploy capital to where we need them to go. And it's great to hear from Carlos of some of the successes that we've seen in Costa Rica. And we need to be sharing these best practices right across all countries.
Thank you. So a simple first question for all of you. Let's start easy. How much money do we need to build the infrastructure necessary for a sustainable low carbon economy? Pedro, why don't you take that first?
Well, I think you've already heard some numbers thrown out on a global scale. Just using the California example, in our analysis of the pathway to 2045, we saw a requirement for $75 billion just for the electric grid piece of this. And in addition to that, there'll be billions needed for new renewable resources, and importantly, billions needed for end-use customers to retool their energy use, to buy an electric vehicle, or to buy an electric heater, or a more efficient appliance. But importantly, it's not just the investment side, it's the return side. And we estimate that because of the higher efficiency of these technologies, the average consumer in California in 2045 will be spending 1/3 less than today in real terms on their total energy bill, right? And that's because of that retooling away, for example, from gasoline or petrol for their vehicles to clean electricity, to fuel that. And so that's an important promise here, that there's economic benefit to be had in addition to the climate benefit.
Thanks. Rhian.
Yeah, I was going to reference some estimates from here in the UK along very similar lines. So the Committee on Climate Change estimated that in order for the United Kingdom to meet our net zero targets by 2050, that's going to require an investment of around 1 to 2% of gross domestic product per year. And in the UK, our GDP is around £2.2 trillion. So, but importantly, looking at what that could mean at the local level, a report earlier this summer by the Local Government Association focused that nearly 700,000 direct jobs could be created just in England in the low carbon and renewable energy economy by 2030, rising to more than 1.18 million by 2050. And specifically, nearly half of those low carbon jobs by 2030 will be in clean electricity and generation, so very much echoing what Pedro's just said, providing low carbon heat for homes and businesses, such as manufacturing wind turbines, installing solar panels, installing heat pumps. Around a fifth of those jobs involved in installing energy efficiency products, insulation, lighting, control systems, and a similar number will be based on providing low carbon services, financial, legal, and IT, which is obviously great news for all of us on the call, and providing alternative fuels such as bioenergy and hydrogen, and obviously manufacturing low emission vehicles and the associated infrastructure is another sector that will contribute significant numbers of jobs. So I've said it before and I'm going to keep saying it, there is no intellectually coherent high carbon route to growth and prosperity. There wasn't before COVID, there certainly isn't now. The pathways to prosperity are the same pathways that take us to net zero.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the European level, I think they've estimated between 1.75 and 290 billion in additional funding, because obviously there is existing commitments. So I think what we're also identifying that policymakers and regulators have identified is there is a funding gap. And that funding gap actually cannot be met solely by governments or taxpayers. It really has to be met by capital market investments. And so I think to that end, I think there's another question that is worth asking, which is what is the cost if we don't invest that additional amount of money into those resources? And so we've done some research on that, and we found that analyzing S&P 500 companies, for example, we've looked at where those assets are owned by S&P 500 companies, and we've analyzed where they're located, and we've looked under 8 kind of climate hazards. And we found that 60% of S&P 500 companies are exposed to extremely high risks. And in particular, 38% of counties in the US, in fact, are exposed to extremely high water stress and heat wave type risks. So in looking at droughts and obviously wildfires and that kind of thing. So that has huge implications for investors, because if you're, for example, looking at municipal bonds, you really need to understand what the impact is of a municipal bond that is adapted for a future that is more resilient and targeting a transition to a cleaner and safer economy versus a municipal bond that actually is going to face increased risks, higher defaults, those types of things. And so it's not just the cost of the additional investment required. The flip side is often less well understood, which is the cost of not making those investments in the first place. And so we'd like to shine a light on that. And actually, we've done quite a lot of research on looking at those aspects in terms of the climate-related physical risk.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's really good to hear all of you say that, because I get asked that a lot. Well, what about the cost? What about the cost? And what's the cost of not doing it? And it's good to hear you all coming back to that, because I think that is the critical question. Minister McKenna, what are the opportunities when it comes to rebuilding large chunks of society?
Well, so I want to start where everyone left off. I think the opportunity of everyone working together, and I think it is about learning from each other. So we've created what's called the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and that's intended to crowd in private sector, because there's often a huge focus on governments, more money, more spending, more investment. Of course, government has a huge role to play. We've made historic investments in green infrastructure, public transit, innovation, adaptation, all those pieces. But we have to make sure that we're creating the right incentives for the private sector to come in. Richard, you're absolutely right. Disclosure is key. I'm very happy that Mark Carney has come back to Canada. So he is certainly playing a role advising the Prime Minister. But I think it's the opportunity also. We got to keep it real here, so I'll try to be the one keeping it real with Carlos. I went to Summerside, PEI. This is a small town in Prince Edward Island, and it used to be a military town. Military left, so it had to reimagine its economy. It totally redid its grid. You go there now, you see it's producing renewable power. It has electric vehicles. It's creating good jobs. It's working with international players. It is now got a pool. I'm a swimmer, so it's got a pool that's zero carbon. And so, I mean, there's a huge job opportunity and economic opportunity for all communities. And so I think we need to look at that. On the risk side, the risks are enormous. They're enormous for an economy like Canada's. We need to transition, absolutely. But for investors, we have to get out of the short-term thinking. that thinking in quarters when you aren't thinking about climate change, it is going to come to a time where, and Mark Carney, he talked about it, our Minsky moment, are we going to go off a cliff and we're going to adjust because the market will adjust, or are we going to make this an orderly transition? And I think that's what we all want. In terms of the opportunities in Canada, I want us to be the cleanest, most competitive economy with good jobs for everyone. And so that sounds like a lot, but the good news is that, the opportunities are certainly there. I talked about green infrastructure, but we're one of the leading makers of electric buses. So one of the most popular announcements we make is when we announce that we're going to electrify the bus fleet, because that's real things for people. People understand that. But it's also a huge opportunity for Canadian manufacturers, creating good jobs here and an opportunity to export. So that's the way, you have to be real, show tangible benefits, and then you also have to provide a framework to get to net zero by 2050. So we're working on that right now. How do you use all hands on deck, all tools, all solutions to get to net zero by 2050? So we have this orderly transition and so that the market understands where we're going. So back to the Canada Infrastructure Bank, we will be able to leverage the private sector if we say, okay, what are our priorities? Grids, public transit, electrifying the fleet, investing, making historic investments in renewable energy, in things like carbon capture, use and storage. And so I think there's a huge opportunity, but discipline is everything. I've realized this on climate, that you have to be disciplined, you have to have a plan, you have to show your plan to the people who elect you, and you have to show the plan to the market so that they understand that they have this huge economic opportunity, and the flip side, a huge risk if they don't take advantage of it.
Thank you. And Carlos Manuel, the same question to you there about the opportunities.
Okay. Well, I just want to add to what just being said, that nothing of the above will happen without strong political willness and high ambition. And this is what we're lacking. You just take a look to what happened at COP26, where the big economies refused to commit. And there's an evident gap within, what happens in the COP and what the expectations of the people of the planet are. So I think five things are very important in this moment. One is government should continue to raise the level of ambition and allocate resources for implementing this plan. Second, public-private actors must coordinate and scale up finance in sectors beyond renewable energies. And this is something I just mentioned it a little bit before. And then all financial sectors should seek full alignment with the Paris Accord on all of their operations. That's a very important element. Capital markets, banks must shift immediately towards green finance. And last but not least, we need to do the major phasing out of negative investment and subsidies. Without those things, we will continue talking around the cost benefit and how do we mobilize resources. But these are the five things I strongly believe that we need to concentrate so we can be on track for the 2030 and just, of course, for the zero emission carbon neutrality by 2050.
Thank you. And Richard, maybe on the other side of that, we heard some of the risks there from Minister McKenna. What other risks do you see about in this process?
I think there is there's a kind of momentum that is required to maintain and accelerate. And I think there's often discussion of 2050 goals and net zero and portfolios being net zero by 2050. And this is great ambition, but really, there needs to be a lot of action now. And in certain ways, that is difficult. It's difficult to swiftly transition. Change is always kind of tough. But we need to identify those opportunities for rapid action and take those opportunities. Often some of the obstacles that people cite are not necessarily correct anymore. So, for example, the question of, well, will this lose me money if I make these types of investments? That argument is starting to fade, especially during the pandemic. As for example, if we look at the performance from an equity investment perspective, if we look at performance during the pandemic, the S&P 500 versus the ESG equivalent. The ESG equivalent of the S&P 500, the S&P 500 ESG, outperformed, as of last week, 2.7% the S&P 500 on an annualized basis. And the Paris-aligned version of the S&P 500 outperformed by 5.2% on an annualized basis. So even just on a sort of, passive investment perspective, equity perspective, you can still, today find, that actually there is outperformance from an ESG and climate aligned perspective. And I think as we see, the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in the US, $68 trillion, is transferring to millennials, and we note the preferences of millennials, I think there is a huge investment opportunity. So we need to galvanize action against a set of nearer term goals, and we need to be more transparent and communicate to those who wealth is being transferred to that this is possible in a shorter time frame.
Thank you. And you're starting to get into that here, but as we look towards those who are going to suffer the most from climate change, it's often those who've not caused it and have very little to defend themselves. How do we allocate funding to those not traditionally invested in it? Pedro.
Well, that's such an important issue. I mean, if you look just at our customer base of 15 million residents, a third of them qualify for low-income assistance. And they tend to be in some of our poorest communities, sort of disadvantaged communities that are experiencing not just the impacts of global climate, impacts of local climate, like air pollution issues, air quality issues. So it's really important that these programs not leave them behind. And our transition needs to be a just transition for all, not just for the wealthy who can today afford the solar panels on their home or the high-end model electric vehicle. So as we're looking at our programs and those of others, we're ensuring that these are targeting a broad set of communities. And it's really blocking and tackling down at the local level, ensuring that there are programs that incentivize, for example, energy efficiency retrofits for poor homes or for poor apartment buildings so that they can get the lighting upgrades, the HVAC, ventilation, air conditioning, refrigeration sort of upgrades. Those are the small micro steps that are needed to build up towards a transition. Likewise with the electric vehicles, we just received approval from our state regulator for what is now the largest utility program across the United States to develop electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's a $436 million program over the next 4 years or so. But a lot of that program is targeted towards ensuring that there are the financial support mechanisms and the development of charging infrastructure in disadvantaged communities. So that they can have access to the secondhand electric vehicles that will be in the market soon. They can have infrastructure to charge even if they don't have a single family home with a garage with a charger. Right? So these are examples of how that transition really needs to be just. It needs to cover all, and it will require some government incentive and some private capital to ensure that we're helping those who need the most help and who today are frankly the most impacted. One final point. You heard the story about Canada and electric buses. Electric buses are a prime example of a tool that isn't just about greenhouse gas reduction, but it is about local air quality in crowded, disadvantaged communities that today bear the brunt of, frankly, diesel trucks and diesel buses spewing pollutants in those local communities.
Thank you. Rianne, same question to you.
Well, thanks, Helen. And as we're listening to the other panelists, I think, there are two themes, which is one, the top-down solution here. And it was great to hear Minister McKenna talk about the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and its focus on, its sectoral outcomes and deploying both public and private capital towards those. And then again, Pedro emphasizing the point that this is about blocking and tackling at the local level. So you need both the top-down and the bottom-up. And because sadly there is no magic green bullet that anyone's find that, some great big button that we can press and magically transform our economy on this. So I think I might be echoing some of the points that have already been made, but there really is an importance of aligning efforts behind clear sectoral outcomes. We know that especially if we're thinking about deploying capital, not just to deprived communities within OECD countries, but actually towards some of the most vulnerable nations. Carlos made the point about 80% of climate finance tends to be in OECD countries, but some of those non-OECD countries are the ones that are really bearing the brunt of a climate breakdown. And we know that successful deployment of capital requires bankable pipelines of projects, and they may require technical assistance or capacity building that is provided by development agencies, government programs, and these in turn need to be fully aligned with the risk mitigation measures that can then be, from a finance perspective, that can be provided by the DFIs and the concessional finance providers, providing credit enhancements in the form of first loss positions, guarantees, and all of that aligned behind the objective of creating investable markets. As Richard just said, the opportunity for the capital markets and private capital to be deployed right behind all these measures. So, and just one point I'd like to make is about the importance of identifying the vehicles for efficiently deploying capital locally. Green banks can be a powerful tool, or infrastructure banks, either working alongside existing public finance infrastructure, or alternatively repositioning existing finance institutions to have climate and sustainability as their core mandate. In both those instances, however, ensuring a clear focus on real economy outcomes and a mandate for mitigating investment risk. Just one final point, if I may, Helen. We've been talking a lot about carbon mitigation during this panel, but we really do need to make sure that our investment in net zero infrastructure also is investment in resilient infrastructure. There is really no point building energy efficient homes if they get washed away in the flood, which is, to quote my good friend Emma Howard-Boyd, the UK's representative on the Global Commission on Adaptation. And going back to the topic that we started on, that particular Global Commission has found that the net benefit of investing in resilient infrastructure over the next decade in developing countries would be $4.2 trillion over the lifetime of that new infrastructure, with a $4 benefit for every $1 invested. So very much echoing some of those points that we made earlier.
Thank you. And I want to go back to Minister McKenna, because you picked this up right in your introductory remarks, and we've heard some more since, but it'd be great to hear from you on that, about how we do allocate funding to those traditionally not invested.
So, I mean, this is a topic that is very dear to my heart, and I could go in many ways. I'm going to say three things. And I think that Rian Mari is right. You've got to do top down and bottom up. So let me start with people. So we put a price on pollution, which people are saying, oh my gosh, everything's going to be more expensive. But what we did is that we gave the revenue back. And so it means that the poorest people will get the most money because they, don't have, big houses, cars, cottages. And I think that's critically important. They will have more money in their pocket than they had before. It's how you position things, but also how you think about equity. Affordable housing, making it more energy efficient. That saves either the housing provider or it saves the client, the resident, money. So that's a huge benefit. Public transit. Public transit, we've said, is not just about climate, but it's certainly about climate. But it's also about equity. It's people getting around faster, cleaner, and more affordable ways. So that's at the very local level. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. Also, I talk about our Indigenous communities, how we work directly with Indigenous communities to look at opportunities, to look at how we build the infrastructure they need that means cleaner air, cleaner water, getting them off diesel. And then you go to sectors that are being really hurt. So we had maybe the world's first just transition task force, I don't know, but we brought together labor leaders, business community members. As we're phasing out coal, I mean, you're really phasing out jobs. And that has a huge impact on people's lives. It also has a huge impact on communities who have relied on coal for their prosperity. And so we went to communities and we listened to people. And we said, and they were mad. Some of them were very angry, and some of them were scared, and some of them just wanted a better future for their kids. They wanted clean air too, but they wanted jobs. And then we're making investments to support the just transition. And that is so critically important. It's important if you're going to build a coalition of people, but it's also making sure no one is left behind. And then we'll go to the international front. And Carlos has been very clear on this, that we have a moral obligation to help countries that have done the least to cause climate change. And we also have an economic opportunity mostly for them, which is what I want. I want these countries to be able to succeed and prosper. That has to be investments in adaptation. It can't just be in mitigation, because many of these countries will be underwater, well below, even if we stay well below 2 degrees. So resilience is a huge part of it, but also on the huge opportunities. When we look at moving towards renewables, there's a clear business case, but maybe there's a slight, because of the risk associated with capital, we can help, developed countries can help. You have to put money on the table. We made the largest investment in climate finance in Canada's history when we came in. We all know we need to be doing more. And I could go into, if we don't do that, what are the impacts going to be? We're going to see even greater instability in the world, climate refugees, conflict. So it's actually in our broader interest to do this. But I think at the end of this, we always have to look at climate from an equity lens as well. That we need to be inclusive. It's a big opportunity for businesses to make money. That's fine. But it's also an opportunity to ensure a fairer world where everyone has a chance to succeed, in particular our most marginalized, who are really struggling right now.
Thank you. And you started to talk there about the just transition. So my sort of final, very quick question, which will be to Pedro and then Richard, for just quick last comments on, it's a global issue, climate change. And if we don't take everyone with us, we are going to suffer the consequences. And we heard the Minister talking there. But with that in mind, who foots the bill for a just transition? And let's go to you first on that, Pedro.
I think ultimately we all do. And that's because all of us face the consequences of not footing the bill. That needs to be spread out equitably. That means that there's a role for private investment, there's a role for government, both through short-term subsidies and through requirements and standards that need to be set. But ultimately, this is a global issue that cuts across all of society, and we need to make sure that we're all chipping in to the extent that we all can. And that means that some of us may need to foot a larger part of the bill.
Thank you. And Richard?
Yeah, I agree with those comments, although I'd like to sort of reframe it slightly and say I'd like to think that actually net, there isn't a bill, there's a benefit. Because there is a presentation of any kind of climate action or anything to do with alignment with sustainable development goals costing money. And the reality is, I think this is, as many of my colleagues have said, one of the greatest economic opportunities, that we face actually, in truth, although it's obviously a great crisis if we don't. We do need to assure that the transition is done in a just way, and that the poorest and the nations that need the money the most get those types of funds. But I do think that if we have the right set of information, if we integrate that information into the right places, we will make the right decisions. The need to do so is obvious. I think most people are on the same page with that. And I think the need to make progress is obvious. I mentioned the millennials, receiving a huge windfall. 67% want to make an impact with that money. So, 2/3 of millennials would like to make an impact with 68 trillion. That's more than enough money, I think, to address this problem. And I'd like to think that there's not really a bill, it's an opportunity.
Thank you. And I think that's a really great thing to end this panel with. So just on behalf of the audience here, thank you all so much for participating in this. It was really great to hear this range of opinions, and look forward to hearing the rest of our session today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
So, President-designate, thanks for an opportunity to have a quick chat today. I don't know that you are aware of this, but you won the lottery, because I am old enough in this process, many decades, to remember when the idea of global stock takes originally began to germinate. And it took several years, actually, to continue to nurture that idea and understand what the role was going to be of the global stock takes, and the periodicity and the transparency and the accountancy, all of that. And eventually that was then included in the Paris Agreement, as you well know. And at that time, when we were working on that text, it was the idea of the first global stocktake was only an idea. But you have won the lottery because you will preside over the first global stocktake, which is quite a responsibility on your shoulders because you will be setting the standard for all of the other global stocktakes to come. And it is a huge responsibility on your shoulders because not that we could have predicted this, and it's certainly not included in the Paris Agreement, but you are doing this in the middle of the unprecedented pandemic, in the middle of an economic paralysis, the likes of which we have never seen. But you're also doing this in the middle of a whole global process of green recovery packages, or I put the word green in there because that's my wish, but certainly recovery packages. So I would just love to hear from you how we are definitely in a crisis, but as we know from Chinese wisdom, every crisis is only an opportunity. And I would love to know from you both sides, how you have experienced this as a crisis, but also how you are moving through it to convert it into a historical opportunity.
Well, Christiana, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and actually an honor to have an opportunity to have this discussion with you. You're absolutely right. We are living in quite unprecedented times. There's no doubt about that at all. I came into this role in the middle of February, and one of the first events that I went to within literally a matter of days was at Wilton Park, which, as you know, is where the Foreign Office in the UK has its conference centre. And I had this unique privilege to be able to meet in that one meeting, everyone from Laurent Fabius to Laurence Damià to Manuel Pulgar-Vidal, everyone who's sort of steeped in previous COPs, and that was a sort of a wonderful occasion and a great sort of learning process in a very short period of time. I then had an opportunity to go early on in March to the UN. I had an opportunity to meet with the permanent representatives and of course address the UN as well alongside the Secretary General. And what was really interesting about that was the conversations that I had and this real desire for us to make COP26 a success, for us collectively to work to tackle climate change. And it was also actually a really poignant visit because when I was in New York, the news came through that the first death in the UK from COVID had taken place. And incredibly sad, but of course, what was even more poignant was the fact that this was an individual who had lived in the area that I represent as a member of Parliament. As you say, since that time in early March, we have had this unprecedented time. Governments, ministers across the world working night and day. But I think if we look at the sort of packages that have been coming out, absolutely, I think they are underlining this green recovery. And I do think we are at that tipping point where business, civil society, individuals, but also governments are realizing that we do need to build back better. And from a UK perspective, we've set out some of those green measures in terms of that green recovery. And I feel confident, actually, that we are at that point where we're going to go forward collectively and achieve what I think, perhaps some months ago, we wouldn't have thought that was possible, and that is this sort of momentum for a green recovery.
Well, and I have been very public about the fact that when the first conversations were afoot about delaying the date of COP26, I was frankly not enthused with that because I think that deadlines are healthy and we all stand up to the challenge of deadlines. However, I am delighted to have been wrong, and I admit it publicly because now my sense is that we have those extra 12 months to garner the force, the motivating engine of the private sector, of civil society, of individuals, of the finance sector, who I really think are galvanizing around the big picture of addressing climate change. And well, you're in the UK, I am not, but I'm sure you saw, just to use one example, the remarkable announcement of BP, the transition that BP is actually engaged in, being one of the leaders of the oil and gas industry. And they're not alone. There's just a whole host. Every week, I see at least 2-3 large corporations really come out and say, we have understood that we have to be part of this conversation and part of this solution. And I do think that corporate and investment moving forward will help to give the courage and the confidence to governments who need to be in the front lines at COP26, give them the confidence that they need to do what they need to do at the first global stocktake, which is increase ambition. But I can say that rather easily because I no longer have the responsibility to be coordinating with governments like you do. And I see a lot of movement outside what we call stakeholders, but not necessarily in governments. And the European Union has taken an incredible leadership position with a new NDC coming forward. And certainly with their green recovery packages that they have actually already been able to approve. But I'm curious to know your experience, because outside of the European Union, and you must speak to all of these governments, that is your responsibility. Do you see a equal understanding, or at least an emerging understanding on the part of governments of both the impact of recovery packages on the carbon intensity of the global economy over the next few decades, as well as how can they leverage those recovery packages to converge the solutions for so many crises? Because yes, we have converged the crisis, not that we asked for it, but they have converged. But we can converge the solutions if governments understand that that is an opportunity. Are you beginning to see the light at the end of that tunnel with other governments outside of the EU, that this actually is an extraordinary opportunity to address climate, to address biodiversity, inequality, and so many other issues?
Yeah, well, Christiana, I think it's a really great question. And despite the fact that we've been in this COVID crisis period where we are doing everything short term to support businesses, support livelihoods of our people. Of course, I mean, the climate crisis hasn't taken time off. And I have had bilateral discussions with over 35 countries, ministers in 35 countries, and we're continuing that engagement as well. And I'm very keen in those conversations to emphasize that actually, if ever there was a time to come forward with green recovery packages, this is it. And you will have seen yourself, the polling, the opinion polling that has gone on internationally as well, where actually it doesn't matter where you are in the world. This is that moment where populations across the world want this to be a lasting recovery and a sustainable recovery as well. And that, of course, means a green recovery. So I'm very keen when I have those conversations to tell fellow ministers that we need to come forward with ambitious NDCs, with ambitious long-term strategies. But of course, in terms of the packages that governments are announcing right now, they need to have very much a sort of a green thread, if I can put it, through all the announcements that they're making. And I think that is recognized. As you said, you've seen that in countries in Europe, you're seeing that in countries in other parts of the world. And of course, ultimately, it's also up to each of us as individual governments to do our bit. And from a UK government, as I said, we've set out proposals, and we will be doing more of this in the coming months. So I am actually hopeful. And you made a really important point there about businesses. And businesses are actually driving this change themselves as well. We've set up a business advisory council made up of international business leaders. I had the first meeting last week, And again, they are absolutely galvanized around this. And there is a recognition, firstly, because it is, of course, the right thing to do to set science-based targets getting to net zero. But ultimately, what I think many businesses also realize is that it is good for the bottom line as well in doing this. So I do think we are at that sort of inflection point where everyone is coming together and recognizing that we need to have this green recovery.
And I also wanted to ask you about the UK NDC, because this will be the first time that the UK presents its own NDC post-Brexit. And the European Union has already come forward with where they're going to be. I believe I have been aware of the fact that the cabinet in the UK has already made a proposal for a rather ambitious NDC, but that is only a proposal. And so I was curious to know what you can share about that process of the UK coming forward with a strong and ambitious NDC, given the fact that I know from so many years that the COP presidencies always need to role model what they want to see from other countries. So I would love to know where you see that going in hopefully the next few weeks or months.
Yeah. Well, please, thank you for that. You will forgive me if I don't go into the details of the discussions that we're having in cabinet. What I can tell you is the process. Look, firstly, I do recognise that as a presidency, we need to show ambition ourselves, just as we're asking others to do. And actually, in terms of the process, our Prime Minister set up 2 committees when it comes to climate action. It's the first time we've done this in a UK government. One is a strategy committee, which looks at climate action, which the Prime Minister chairs. The other is a implementation committee, which I chair. And sitting on these committees are the cabinet ministers who are responsible for departments which themselves have responsibility for parts of our economy, which, of course, we need to address emissions. So transport, agriculture, housing. And we are systematically going through looking at what policies we need to put in place to enable us to meet our carbon budgets. So there is a lot of systematic work going on. But I understand the desire for us to come forward and people to know where we are. But all I can say to you at this stage is that we are working very hard. We're working very hard, and I hope in due course we will be able to come forward with something positive.
I have full confidence, and I know the intricacies of government working, so I'm not surprised that you've had to set up that process. But I'm trying to pull the threads together of this conversation, and it seems to me that what we've been talking about from different perspectives is the emergence of what can be recognized as a virtuous cycle here, where governments are beginning to feel the confidence to move forward, where corporates are definitely in the lead, pushing. Very interestingly, where individuals and citizens have much higher expectations, especially now in a post-COVID world, much higher expectations, both of governments as well as corporates, and where their expectation is the hard wall that used to divide corporates from governments is actually coming down, my sense is, because corporates are now being expected to contribute to the environmental and social solutions in addition to their own profitability. It's just no longer enough to just be profitable. You have to put profit, people, and planet on your bottom line, or else you're just not going to be blessed by social tolerance and certainly not by client preference. But from governments, I also see that there is a lot of expectation of citizens of their governments to stand up and act more responsibly in protection of their citizens' interests and well-being. And so that for me, and the third leg of that, of course, is the financial sector that is beginning to see that the relationship between risk and reward has completely changed around, and that they cannot continue to put capital into high-risk stranded assets that are going to deplete their value of their investment portfolio or of their assets. So those three pieces, seems to me, are really working better with each other. They were always there, and they've always done sort of cross-boundary collaboration. But my sense is that there is more and more awareness that those are three pieces that are together creating this virtuous cycle of a race to the top, and the sense of urgency that science has been giving us for such a long time is now beginning to rub off on those three sectors as well. I have a sense that urgency is now really beginning to penetrate into decisions of all three. Is that your sense, or would you agree that there's a virtuous cycle that is starting here, and hopefully that the speed and scale of that virtuous cycle is increasing?
Yes, I would agree with that entirely, and I think what you're talking about as a phenomenon is something that is very live, and I think it is actually speeding up. And quite rightly, people have expectations of their governments. They have expectations of businesses, and from a COP perspective, I'm very keen that COP26 is as inclusive as we possibly can be. I think that's absolutely vital, and I think the voice of civil society, the voice of youth, the voice of indigenous peoples, that absolutely has to come through. That is, for me, that is a non-negotiable issue. We need to make sure that our people are able to speak up and their voice is actually heard. And as part of this, one of the things that we are doing is setting up an advisory group on COP26, again, an international advisory group bringing together youth and civil society, and we'll be launching that shortly. And I want to hear from them, and I want to hear their ideas, and we want to try and incorporate that as part of COP26. But again, businesses, when I had my discussion with our business group, we concluded that actually what we can't do is just have these meetings in silos. What we need to do is put together the businesses together with the youth, together with civil society. And I want to be doing a lot more of that over the coming year. And one of the points that I make in every single conversation that I have, whether it's with businesses or with governments or with NGOs or civil society or youth groups, is that success at COP26 is going to belong to all of us. Yes, the UK and our friends in Italy, we are sort of organizing from a presidency point of view, but I'm very mindful of the fact that this needs to be entirely collaborative, and we need to make sure that at the end of that process, everybody feels involved and everybody feels that we have achieved something lasting. And if we can do that, I think we will absolutely be able to look at each other and say, yes, we made this a success.
Well, I would certainly agree with you, and I think you have totally stepped into the role of COP president so beautifully with that as your North Star, because that is exactly the role and the responsibility of the COP president is to lead in collaboration and lead and foster the collaboration and the collective success as you see it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christiana. I'm so pleased that I have you alongside me on this journey over the next 14, 15 months.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again soon, I know.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to panel 2, the long journey to net zero, setting up the next generation for success. Please allow me to introduce our speakers. We have Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes of Wisconsin, Minister Damià Calvet, Minister of Territory and Sustainability for Catalonia, Alexandra Liftman, the Global Environmental Executive at Bank of America, and Nancy Mann, Senior Vice President, Global Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability at the Estée Lauder Companies. start, I'll ask each of them a question, and then we'll go into more of a general discussion. So, Lieutenant Governor Barnes, starting with you, what's the importance of making sure the next generation has an inclusive approach to climate action?
Well, it's important if you just think from a purely from a perspective that clearly just recognize the changing demographics, especially in the United States. The majority of children who are born here are non-white, and we need to make sure that we are preparing a space and also encouraging environmentalism across more broader lines or more broad lines. A lot of the environmental movement has been confined in some fairly homogeneous spaces, but we can change that. And it's necessary. We have to change that if we want to not just change the conversation, but change the rate of movement on environmentalism and addressing the climate crisis. We have to think about the world that's going to be left for the next generation. I think that is our responsibility as leaders, and it's important for us to have that inclusive approach, because too often we find ourselves a part of a movement that has traditionally left people behind, people of color, lower income communities, our indigenous communities. And to find the answers, we should just look at the communities that have been doing this work for the longest, and also the communities that have been most adversely impacted. You can look at what's going on in the Gulf Coast right now with these raging storms that are threatening people's lives and livelihoods. These are very diverse communities that are dealing with the impact of climate change. We witnessed similar situations after Hurricane Katrina. And even here in Wisconsin, as a state that has been dealing with some very extreme weather patterns, experiencing 100-year storms far more often and regular than we should be, which is threatening our rural communities and rural economies as a result. And so understanding that we cannot continue to go down this path, recognizing that we're at a turning point where it is not just the possibility for people to craft a nation, it is out of pure necessity at this moment. And decisions can no longer be made at the expense of our most vulnerable communities.
Thank you. Minister Calvet, for you, a lot of people talk about putting a cost on carbon as the best way to not hand that cost of our actions to future generations. You're taking those steps now. Can you tell us how it's going?
Thank you, Helen. Let me say that it's a pleasure to share my views with you, our views, the Catalan government views. We are determined to do what we are determined to do in the next decade to succeed in a net zero emissions economy. And related with this carbon tax, indeed in Catalonia, we passed an ambitious climate change law in 2017, which has rolled out new measures, among others, to tax industrial sectors and vehicles on their CO2 emissions. The truth is that this latter subject is presenting a great challenge. You have to know that in addition to the inherent complexities of introducing a new tax, the Spanish state challenging it, by the way, this has been rejected. The current social and economic crisis caused by COVID-19 arrived. So great challenge for us to implement this tax. We have not give up, and we will be prepared to have this tax implemented for next year. And in parallel to this, we have pushed for the creation of a nature agency, the Catalan Nature Agency, whose budget will be coming from half of this tax revenue. This will allow us to substantially improve the management of the natural environment, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem restoration, which are vital to reduce climate change impacts and maintain ecosystem services.
Thank you. Alex, thank you for joining us today. From Wall Street to Main Street, what's the role of finance in the move to net zero?
Well, first of all, it's my pleasure to be on this very esteemed panel and to be participating yet again in Climate Week. But if you just think of the scale of the challenge we face today, if you look at what has been recommended by the IPCC, that we need to get to half, of the emissions that we have today by 2030 and to net zero by 2050, that sheer magnitude of that challenge is enormous. And in order to meet this goal, we are going to need to reimagine every sector of the economy, starting with energy. And if you just think about the energy, the clean energy investments that we need to make, we need to find another $3 to $4 trillion to invest on an annual basis just in energy, not even thinking about the realignment we need to make in agriculture, in consumer goods, across sectors. So we're going to invest a lot of capital. We have to find new capital. We have to reposition the capital that's in the market today. And that's what banks do. So I can talk a little bit about our own story at Bank of America, but I would emphasize that really the financial services sector as a whole, whether you're looking at banks or wealth advisors, asset managers, or institutional investors, we are all pivoting to address this capital challenge. At Bank of America, we feel a really strong responsibility to play a leading role in investing in this transition. We started mobilizing capital to this challenge over a decade and a half ago. And if you look at the series of commitments that we've made since that time up through 2030, with our current commitment to deploy $300 billion in capital, we will have helped to mobilize $500 billion toward this challenge. And I would say that's a floor, not a ceiling. We all need to, and the Lieutenant Governor and the Minister talked about this so eloquently, we all need to increase our level of ambition. But at Bank of America, we really like to overachieve on our goals. So I'm optimistic that we will do that. And if you think about the nature of your question and how we need to think about this challenge, we have been, I talked about committing scale. We're also really committed to innovation and to serving clients across the spectrum. So we're helping certainly our largest clients, Wall Street, if you will, to invest in low carbon, to invest in this transition of their sector and their industry. An example of that was we're one of the earliest and we're one of the largest tax equity investors in the solar and wind that's been deployed here in the US, the utility scale solar and wind. But we're also helping Main Street, right? Our retail customers to meet and to exceed their own goals in terms of how they want to transition by helping to finance, a gigawatt of residential solar. And we're doing everything in between. Obviously small and mid-sized enterprise serve those customers and supply those large corporates. So I would just say we plan to keep raising the bar on our own level of ambition to meet these big goals, and other financial services players need to do the same. And I see them stepping up to do the same, but we've got a lot of action that we have to accelerate. We've got tremendous amount of urgency around this issue, and pleased to work with everybody on this call and others to meet this enormous challenge.
Nancy, 2020 kicked off a critical decade for climate action. What's this year meant for the Estee Lauder companies, and what's the clearest way that your business is meeting the expectations of the next generation on climate?
Great question, Helen. At Estee Lauder, many of us, as you know, have had many complex challenges across this year, sadly, because of COVID. I'm happy to report that operationally, we have had our largest year of building and installing solar power for the company, over 5 megawatts. We were able to announce last year at this event that we invested in wind power in Oklahoma, and we are now setting our sights internationally and planning for solutions in Asia. I would say overall, what has been, heartening about our operations during COVID is it has not slowed us down. We have met RE100 early in the US and in Canada, and we're on track to also meet our science-based target goal. I think it's also shown that we are capable of immense reduction of carbon use and still able to carry on our business and to do very well. As we move forward, we welcome particularly this panel that we have folks from local and national governments and also the banks. I think the bottom line now is that we clearly need to reverse engineer from the Paris Climate Accord and to understand that we can drastically reduce our carbon footprint and still keep economies going. And how we work together to make that happen, I think, is the great challenge for all of us. And then lastly, I just want to mention, building on the Lieutenant Governor's great remarks, is that particularly as a beauty company, we are struck by the incredible and sad intersectionality of climate justice and gender justice and economic justice and racial justice. And I think that there's absolutely no doubt that coming out of the incidents around George Floyd's death in the United States, that we need to band together to understand why certain communities are so disproportionately impacted around racial injustice, around gender injustice, around climate injustice. And we have to understand that climate is one piece of a much bigger solve for building a more equal, a more joyous, and a more enriching life for all communities.
Thank you. And then a question to all of you, and we'll go in the same order. What do you believe we have to collectively achieve in the climate decade? So, Lieutenant Governor, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you for another great question. I guess I didn't even mention this the first time, was how grateful I am to be a part of this panel. But I think collectively we all understand that the biggest need for us in the next decade is to reduce emissions as much as possible. That means less dependence on fossil fuels, because they are quite literally destroying the planet and the health and safety of people all across this country. That is somewhat evidenced also with the wildfires on the West Coast. Our nation is literally ablaze right now. Now, wildfires do happen, I guess, fairly regularly, but the intensity right now is the same as we look at these storms. Storms are going to happen. We're going to have hurricanes, we're going to have tornadoes, but it's the intensity of these storms, is the intensity of these wildfires that should have us all concerned. And I think it's important for us to have big picture policies. We have to look at the broad spectrum of the way that we go about our business in the United States, in both the public and private sector. So I want to thank the people here who are representing corporate America for being responsible, for understanding that there is a critical need for us to shift our focus, and to also be more conscious of the way that we use energy and the way that we think about conservation and preservation. And sometimes this could mean less cars in certain communities. And we also have to understand, too, that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. What works good for one community isn't going to work well for every community. The urban solutions are going to be different than the suburban solutions, and those are going to be different than the rural solutions. In some areas, that means less cars, less concrete, smaller supply chains, more mass transit, more local food, and so on. And we understand that you're not going to have mass transit operations in rural America. That's just not the case. But we also have to build on the political will, or build the political will, I should say, to make climate change and the crisis a priority across sectors, as we are trying to do here, even with a panel discussion like this. But it has to happen globally as well. We need action at every level. I talk about this, and I'm glad, I heard that George Floyd's death was mentioned, and like one of the questions we always get is, well, what's next? And I say, well, we need action at every level, and it's no different with the climate crisis. We need action at every level, and government should absolutely lead the way, but we need all hands on deck. We need all partners to understand what we are collectively dealing with. And that understanding can't be overstated, because there still seem to be far too many people that are willing to push this issue off to the side for whatever else. There are still people who will say that, well, this idea is too bold, it's too much. At the same time, our country is burning in the background, and it's a very sad juxtaposition that we find ourselves. We find too many of our leaders in.
Thank you. Minister Calvet.
Simply, we have to face the greatest disruption ever in terms of energy transition, mobility, decarbonization, and circular economy. A major shift that must be driven by all citizens, by all sectors, and by all governance. This is the political will that my colleague was explaining right now. It is also crucial to accelerate the transition toward non-energy intensive industries. In many industrial sectors, this transition involves not only a change in energy sources, but also a redesign of production processes. Another thing, we have to establish sound legislative frameworks, the creation of appropriate incentives or the launching of programs that facilitate and support the emergence of new industries and the adaptation of more traditional industrial sectors. This is what we're trying to do right now in Catalonia in the framework of Europe. Of course, we have goals to achieve in Europe, translated, let's say, put it in figures in Catalonia. We have undertaken to reduce GHG emissions by 40% from 2005 to produce 50% of our electricity from renewable energy sources, and to reduce energy consumption through an increase of energy efficiency. So this is all that we have to achieve, and we have to be able to put all these achievements in the agenda of the governments. Here in Catalonia, we are in the Mediterranean region, and you have to know that this is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change. The warming effect in this region is 3,600% faster than the global average. This highlights existing environmental problems caused by the combination of changes in land use, increases, pollution increases, and loss of biodiversity. So adaptation to climate crisis is also vital for our jurisdiction.
Thank you. Alex?
Well, Helen, I would certainly echo all of the comments that have been made about the real current crisis and the urgency of addressing this situation, the need for public policy solutions in addition to private corporation or private industry solutions. I would say very specifically, we need to significantly ramp up the fully commercialized, price-effective technologies that we have available to us today. You know, here in the US, we have less than 2% penetration of electric vehicles, although we have many great electric vehicles on the market. That needs to ramp up to 80% by 2030, 100% by 2050. So we have a lot of work to do. In renewable energy, we have about 17% of our electricity grid here in the US is renewable. That needs to double by 2030. That needs to double again by 2050. And those are all commercialized technologies that Nancy talked about, that Bank of America, that we're installing on our facilities across the country and across the globe today. And many other corporations can and are doing that. And then we need to invest a significant amount of money, coming back to finance, in the emerging growth, next generation technologies that will help to solve emissions in hard to abate sectors, or take us the next leg in the electricity grid. You know, investing in advanced nuclear, investing in hydrogen, investing in ammonia. So all of those technologies need to be live and working by 2030, so we can really implement them by 2050. So we need to invest a lot in that next stage of technology. And then finally, and this has been so well and articulately said by other speakers, but we have to address inequities. And I think people have spoken to the inequitable impact of environmental and climate issues on, in particular, Black and Latinx and low income communities across the globe. So I won't repeat that. I would say on the flip side of the coin, those communities are not benefiting from the billions of dollars that are being invested today in the transition. I love all my white male colleagues, but those clean energy sectors and clean technology sectors are predominantly male, and they are predominantly white today. And if we're going to take that from billions to trillions, all communities have to benefit from that investment. And so we have lots of different challenges that we have to solve in the equity game, but we really need to focus a lot of intention in how big corporates like us do our procurement. That's something we really looked at when we went carbon neutral, when we went 100% renewable. We ensured that the people who were installing solar on our roofs represented all of our communities. We need to help to invest in reskilling and upskilling that is specifically targeted or on communities of color. We need to focus on investments in community of color, and that's a lot of what the bank is doing today. We have to be really really intentional to solve this third leg of the challenge, which is beyond the technology challenge and the finance challenge to the people challenge of how we really build back better in the years to come.
Thank you. And Nancy.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Alexandra. And I would just add, I mean, I think that the intentionality, I mean, one of the having been in various sectors in my career, I'm very struck by the importance of having the best minds in every sector at the table. And I think in particular in terms of corporate culture and I would say consumer goods companies, we're very focused on the value chain of producing products. And we're also very focused in particular on measure, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So similar to our goals in climate around RE100 or science-based targets, which we'll be announcing this fall, we really do need to think about and quantify, for instance, in our strategy, we're not just looking at investors and employees and consumers as stakeholders, but also communities and regulators and governments. And I think that building out of that work across our business is critical to climate solutions. And in particular, we have so much to learn, the minister from Catalonia, so much to learn in the United States from Europe and how you incentivize change. So I think we also need, particularly in the United States, to work with our government colleagues and our electorate and see how it is that we can incentivize climate change. And then just lastly, to build on the remarks earlier, change really does start at home. And so we have really been looking at reduction. And I think the science-based target movement, conquering scope 3, particularly for corporations, will mean greater investments in green energy. And I just also want to support earlier remarks around the importance of investing in green energy. We have found through our incredible procurement teams and finance teams and legal teams that the green energy business, as it were, is relatively nascent. And in order to scale, for the green energy solutions to scale and meet the needs of all of us who are turning to green energy solutions, they need to be, I would say, more bigger, candidly, and I would say more integrated into the banking culture and more integrated into the corporate culture. So that's great work yet to be done. And then lastly, we are also looking at forestry. I mean, sadly, as we see the forests of the United States burn, we really need to think about deforestation and preserving our forests in a way that perhaps maybe a beauty company 3 or 4 years ago would never have looked at. So we need to, as Alexandra was saying, is go to the next level and really focus on all the solutions and broadening our green energy portfolios.
Thank you. And what are the obstacles that are going to hold us back in our delivery? Alex, maybe you could take the corporate perspective on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and Nancy spoke to this a little bit, it really does often come down to will and to setting out the goal and then working backwards. And I will say, obviously, we are a public corporation. We answer to our shareholders. We are very focused on doing our business efficiently and, keeping our costs down and all of the things that other corporations are focused on. So I would emphasize that to start. But when we made the decision to go carbon neutral and 100% renewable electricity, that was our goal. And then we worked backwards to create the most efficient strategy, the highest impact strategy from a climate perspective, from an emissions perspective. As I said, we worked to weave diversity into our strategy, but we started with the goal as a necessity, and then we worked backwards. And it's that just sort of level of ambition that, in our instance, the corporate will, but that could be corporate will, that could be public sector will, that could be community will, that could be all of the different players that need to come together to affect change. But I think sometimes that thinking about the puzzle in a little bit different way, rather than trying to march into these goals, actually setting the goals and then working backwards in terms of how do you achieve it and how do you achieve it quickly and with a sense of urgency, sometimes winds up being the challenge for people. So I would say, there's a lot of work to be done. I am not Pollyanna-ish about the work that needs to be done, the investment that needs to be made, and in a very, very difficult and challenging time, But I would say sometimes it really comes down to the will of an organization and the leadership of that organization. And I feel very lucky to work within an organization that has had that institutional will and top-down leadership from Brian Moynihan and others in order to accomplish these goals.
Thank you. Minister Calvet, for you, a lot of people talk about putting a cost on carbon as the best way to not hand that cost of our actions on to future generations. You're actually taking those steps now. How's that going for you?
Right now, the priority is to deliver an urgent response to the health, social, and economic crisis caused by COVID-19. But however, we cannot postpone the transformative structural changes that we need for the near future. The government, the Catalan government, has put forward an economic recovery and social protection plan with a green agenda as its core that will deliver smart deregularization, decarbonization of the economy, circularity, and digitalization. So at the same time, we have to prioritize all this economic social response to COVID, but also we have to show up that there is a strong commitment for the green agenda and also for many other agendas that complement the green agenda as the urban agenda. We're developing the Catalan urban agenda. But of course, we have obstacles, all kind of obstacles. For instance, an important obstacle for us in Catalonia was the existing legislation that until quite recently not only has not favored the takeoff of renewables, but it has hampered it. So we have changed it to foster renewables. But they have appeared more obstacles in Catalonia, which has a high population density and occasion. The fact that renewables require higher land demand it causes conflicts of interest with other sectors such as agriculture or tourism that are key in our jurisdiction, or even with social cultural values linked, for instance, to landscape. So you can see that there is a permanent deal at different scales, but with clear objectives.
Thank you. And, you know, one of the really big stories for the climate movement, I think, in the last couple of years has been obviously the youth movement. It's really changed things from our perspective. How has the youth movement changed your long-term strategies and allowed you to be bolder? Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, so I think it's vitally important to make sure that we have youth perspective at the table. I mean, there's a reason that young people seem to be more concerned with the climate than previous generations. And that is because they are directly impacted. Their futures are directly impacted. You know, we have students who are in high school and in college and are very uncertain about their future, uncertain about what the world will look like, uncertain about, having children, because the question to many is it responsible to have children in this climate, literally and figuratively, just given what some of the challenges we already face have been and what they continue to be. So it was vitally important when we put together our task force on climate change to at least have some youth perspective there. And we recognize that large scale social movements throughout the course of history have largely been led by young people. And again, too many conversations, young people are left out. And I think that has been to the detriment of any sound policy making. And I would also say that continuing to engage, not just tokenizing, is an important piece of that. And if I can just go right back to the question about the obstacles too, because all of this sort of ties in, because young people aren't necessarily swayed by a lot of the rhetoric that goes counter to the narrative of environmental justice. They get it. They understand. They know what's up. But one of the biggest obstacles we face is money in politics. That is hindering progress at all levels, because people are very concerned with their own reelection versus what the state of this planet is going to be. And it's very disappointing too, because fossil fuel companies are allowed to pump so much money into elections, and also money on the periphery too, because some of the media outlets that are subsidized and sponsored by fossil fuel companies as well. And you have these hosts who are also driven by lining their own pockets, and they'll pump messages out into the public, and they'll play off people's very real fears and frustrations and concerns, especially when it comes to the economy. And they continue to promote a message about environmentalism and fighting climate change as a job killer, which couldn't be more wrong, because this is where jobs are actually being created. This is where we are providing opportunity for people. Many of these fossil fuel jobs are phasing out anyway, but at the same time, you'll get these people on talk radio, on certain cable news shows that will continue to promote this ideology and divide people against one another, rather than coming up with a solution to the problems that we have. So that's the most dangerous part, is the money that's involved, whether it's directly campaign related or the money that's on the periphery. And it drowns out the actual very real message about the need for us to do something. It drowns out the need for us to act urgently.
Thank you. And Nancy, what kind of strategies does the Estée Lauder companies use to listen to and learn from younger generations, particularly around climate and social impact?
In terms of the work that we've done at the Estée Lauder companies, we have really focused on how do we, first of all, engage the whole company. We have a program called Reverse Mentors, where folks like I have folks who are younger. We go shopping with them. We talk with them about markets. We talk with them about our company. We talk with them about values. And we've created a reverse mentor program focusing on greening the company, essentially. And what we're doing is essentially kind of a grassroots, grass tops approach. Similar to Alexandra, the support and leadership of William Lauder, our chairman, as well as Fabrizio Freda, our CEO, is invaluable, particularly for me in my role. At the same time, in order to really change our value chain, we need at every critical decision point to be thinking about climate. So we've integrated across the value chain. We launched, really under the directorship of our head of HR, a big learning program where we partner our sustainability folks. And one of the things that we find a little bit about sustainability and citizenship is, and myself included, is kind of a nerdy topic. And when you start going into scope 1, scope 2, you kind of lose half the room. And so what we're trying to do, really, to the Lieutenant Governor's point, this is so important to so many people. So we want to be a source of education, a source of inspiration, but also across our value chain to educate our company. And then lastly, we are a consumer company, and youth are the consumers of today and tomorrow. And the populist shift, to the Lieutenant Governor's remarks, that we're seeing, at the end of the day, people are buying brands that they believe in. And we believe that our values around climate and around purpose are assets for our company, both because it's of who we are as a family-founded company, but also because we feel it's a way to have consumers vote with their money. So we're excited about kind of touching every part of the business, and we're humbled and encouraged by the youth of today. And to the Lieutenant Governor's part, they're the investors of today and tomorrow. They're the consumers of today and tomorrow, and they're the voters. And they literally are our future. So we welcome the input and we welcome the participation.
That's great. And that leads us incredibly neatly to our last question, which we went out on the platform and we asked the audience if they had any questions for you. And so Stephen Posner, who's the Director of Policy at the Gund Institute for the Environment at the University of Vermont, has a question that he came up with alongside his 14-year-old daughter. So this is from both of them. And we're going to take this as a bit of a quick fire to end on. So how can we involve schools to cultivate the shared responsibility necessary for the next generation to achieve net zero? And this is really the question we'll get from you as a sort of wrap up each, is what is one critical lesson that you think every student should learn? So Alex, let's start with you.
I think the power of their voice to influence leaders like everyone on this call and all the other leaders that need to make change in society today. Thank you. Nancy?
I would say to really encourage the school, engage students in solving around greening the school in very concrete ways, whether it be around recycling or energy use, change starts at home, and once they roll up their sleeves and they get involved, I think it'll be contagious.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I think that these have certainly pushed us to be bolder, and I think that in order for us to prepare that next generation, we should make sure that climate change is a part of curriculum and K-12 education. Objectively, I think students need to learn the reality, just as they learn math and science. Climate change should be a part of the science course curriculum.
Thank you. And Minister Calvet.
I think that they have to know, and I guess that they know it, that they have the power. They are very powerful. We are not here just to let them to inherit the wealth that we are giving to them. We are here to just take care of the wealth that they inherit. So what we need to tell them is that being true, that they have the power to accelerate these changes. They have to learn how to ask for their role, of course, and we have to create conditions in order to have more educational programs at the schools to let them know much more things that they know right now about climate change.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this excellent discussion. Lots of food for thought there. And on behalf of our virtual audience that you can't hear right now, who are clapping probably at home, thank you very much again for joining us on this panel. Well, that brings an end to our high-level session on conquering the climate decade. I think we've gone a long way to answer what leadership looks like from both businesses and governments. Being a digital event this year, we've made a concerted effort to include speakers from all over the world in our events. It's been truly heartening for me to see speakers exchanging approaches, complementing and challenging each other on what leadership looks like. I hope it's felt like there's some Climate Week NYC spirit in your homes and offices today. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their contributions to a fascinating event. I'd also like to thank those of you listening in around the world and being part of the Hub Live. If you've missed events that you were hoping to log into yesterday, they're available on the platform, but there's still plenty more to come. There's now around 20 minutes of time for interactive networking and our exhibition for attendees, where you can meet your fellow delegates and visit some of the booths. And then we'll be back after that here in the auditorium for climate change, deforestation and global pandemics, addressing complex environmental, health and social issues through systematic approaches. I hope that you enjoyed the session as much as I did, and we'll see you all again soon.